The year was 2003, and the vibrant city of Prague was on the brink of a dark revelation. This historic city, known for its picturesque streets, Gothic architecture, and timeless charm, was about to be shaken by a crime so disturbing, so incomprehensibly brutal, that it would forever change the lives of those who heard its chilling details. The murder of Blanka Bočkova was not just a crime, it was a descent into madness. A twisted tale of obsession and a man who would become known as the Vampire Killer. Welcome to the true stories of the Diary of Darkness. Let's delve into the case of the Vampire Killer. To truly understand this story, we must begin many years before the events of that fateful day, tracing back the origins of the man responsible. This is the story of Viktor Karamazov, a man whose journey from troubled childhood to monstrous actions would lead to the senseless death of a young woman, Blanka Bočkova, whose life was tragically cut short. Viktor Karamazov was born in 1975 in a small town just outside of Prague. He was the eldest of 3 children in a family that, at first glance, seemed ordinary. His father worked as a mechanic, while his mother stayed at home to raise Viktor and his siblings. But behind the closed doors of their modest home, things were far from normal. Viktor's father was a heavy drinker, prone to violent outbursts, especially after a long day at work. Viktor would often bear the brunt of his father's temper, leaving him with physical and emotional scars that would linger for the rest of his life. By the time Viktor reached his teenage years, he had developed a fascination with the macabre. He was obsessed with stories of vampires, horror films, and tales of blood rituals. It was more than just a passing interest. It was a fixation. He would spend hours alone in his room, reading about ancient legends of vampires and blood-sucking creatures. In the late 1990s, Viktor moved to Prague, hoping to start anew. But the bustling city, with its vibrant nightlife and endless opportunities, did little to curb his growing thirst for the macabre. He found himself drawn to the city's underground scene, where he met others who shared his fascination with blood rituals and vampirism. He started experimenting with self-harm, drinking his own blood, and engaging in bizarre rituals that only further fueled his twisted fantasies. But soon, drinking his own blood was no longer enough. Viktor craved something more. He wanted to experience the ultimate thrill act of taking another person's life. This dark desire would eventually lead him to Blanka Bočkova, a young woman who would become the tragic victim of his horrific fantasies. Viktor became obsessed with Blanka after spotting her at a local cafe where she worked. She was a bright and spirited young woman in her late 20s, who had moved to the city to pursue her passion for art. To those who knew her, Blanka was full of life, a vibrant soul who enjoyed exploring Prague's art scene and spending evenings with friends at local cafes. But to Viktor, she became something entirely different. She became an object of obsession, fixation that would soon turn deadly. Viktor began to follow Blanka, learning her routines, watching her from the shadows as she made her way home from work each night. It was as if he had convinced himself that she was meant to be his first victim, the one who would finally satisfy his growing bloodlust. He would lurk in the alleyways, hiding behind corners, memorizing the way she walked, the sound of her laughter as she talked on her phone, the way she brushed her hair away from her face. The more he watched, the more he convinced himself that this was his destiny. Then came the night of November 20, 2003, a night that would forever change the lives of those who knew Blanka and the city of Prague itself. It was a cold, foggy evening, the kind where the mist seemed to swallow the city whole. Blanka had just finished her shift at the cafe and was walking home, her mind preoccupied with plans for the weekend. She had no idea that Viktor was lurking just a few steps behind her, hidden by the thick fog and the dim streetlights. As she rounded a quiet corner, Viktor made his move. He lunged at her, grabbing her from behind, one hand clamping over her mouth to muffle her screams. Blanka struggled, but Viktor's grip was strong, fueled by years of pent-up rage and a thirst for blood that could no longer be contained. He dragged her into a dark alleyway, far from the prying eyes of passersby. In the darkness of the alley, Viktor's fantasies became reality. He pulled out a knife he had been carrying for weeks, waiting for this very moment. With a frenzy that bordered on madness, he stabbed her repeatedly, the blade slicing through flesh as if it were paper. But it wasn't just the act of stabbing that drove him, it was what came next. Viktor bent down, pressing his mouth against the wounds, drinking her blood as if it were some twisted sacrament. He was lost in a frenzy, believing he was finally becoming the creature he had always dreamed of: a vampire. A being who could transcend human limitations. When Viktor finally came to his senses, Blanka was dead. The reality of what he had done started to sink in. But instead of feeling remorse, he felt an overwhelming sense of satisfaction. He left her body crumpled in the alleyway, drained of blood, before disappearing into the night. The next morning, Blanka's body was discovered by a passerby, who immediately called the police. The crime scene was one of the most gruesome that the authorities had ever encountered. The brutality of the attack, the bite marks on her body, and the fact that her blood had been drained led the media to quickly dub the case the vampire murder. Panic spread through the city as people feared that a real-life vampire was stalking the streets of Prague. The investigation that followed was intense, with detectives working around the clock to catch the killer. Witnesses came forward, describing a strange man who had been seen loitering around the cafe where Blanka worked. The police scoured hours of surveillance footage, eventually spotting a grainy image of Viktor following Blanka on the night she was murdered. It wasn't much, but it was enough to put him on their radar. The break in the case came from an unexpected cercione of Viktor's acquaintances from the underground scene, who had heard rumors about Viktor boasting of his dark desires. An anonymous tip led the police to Viktor's apartment, where they found a chilling collection of evidence: books on vampirism, blood-stained clothing, and, most damning of all, a knife with traces of Blanka's DNA. Viktor was arrested, and under intense questioning, he eventually confessed. In a chilling, detached manner, he recounted how he had stalked Blanka, attacked her, and drank her blood. He claimed he had felt an inner compulsion, as if he were fulfilling a destiny that had been calling him for years. When asked if he felt any remorse, he simply smiled and said, "I am what I was meant to be." For the city of Prague, the capture of Viktor Karamazov brought some measure of relief. But the scars he left behind would never fully heal. Blanka's family would never forget the bright young woman who had been taken from them far too soon. And the residents of Prague would always remember the winter of 2003, when a man who believed himself to be a vampire stalked their streets, turning a beautiful city into a place of fear. In the end, Viktor's dark fantasies led him not to immortality, but to a life sentence behind bars. Let me know, what do you think of this case, and which you would like to see next? Till next time.